So we're feeding a bit of that this year. They're loving that.
Yeah, cool. Right, we might crack into
still trying
it.
to figure out stocking rate. I think we're still a bit heavy. Okay.
Cool. Sorry to cut you off there, Greg.
Yep, you're right.
So it is. So we had quite a few more registered, but I imagine people are going to trickle on in a little bit late, coming in for lunch. But that's all good. We'll make a start, and this is being recorded, so people can catch up on the start. So welcome to the panelists and welcome to those watching. My name's Sam Lang. I work with Quorum Sense, and this webinar is basically a follow-up on the Winter Grazing Innovations case study we released a couple of weeks ago. So that case study covers off two particular winter grazing techniques, so multi-species winter crops and also bale grazing. So I assume most people here and most people that watch this recording will have had a look at that case study and watched that production and had a look at the data and some of the details and stuff that sit below that. And we just really wanted to do this in order to create an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into some more specifics that were hard to capture in a 20-minute film, despite the great job that Dean did there. And so just to introduce people, we've got Dean Parker, who is our Quorum Sense storyteller, who did most of the case study production. So it's his handiwork that you've seen there. And then we've got most of the case study participants that were good enough to share what they're doing and what they're learning and give us their time today. So we've got Dylan Ditchfield from down in Southland, dairy farm there. Ross Monaghan from AgResearch, who has been and still is doing a trial at Dylan's farm down there. We've got Claire Buchanan, who's with Align Farms in Mid-Canterbury, and Greg Lowe, also dairying in Mid-Canterbury. So the other two that are not here were Josh Bradfield, who's a sheep and beef in South Otago, and Mark Anderson, who's actually just down the road from him on a dairy farm. In terms of, just for anyone new to Zoom webinars, I don't mention there's too many, but we'll be using the Q&A box down in the bottom there. So please make sure to flick your questions in there, and I will basically go through them and try and keep some order. I've got a few questions myself that I'll probably use to kick us off, and we'll just go from there. There's also, if anyone wants to share links or anything like that out of interest, you can share that in the chat function down the bottom as well. And yeah, aiming to wrap this up at 1 o'clock or very shortly afterwards. Just to cover off, no such thing as a bad question. This is an opportunity to, if you've got ideas or if you've got questions, then this is probably one of the best opportunities you get. We've got a great range of experience and different contexts and skill sets here to bounce your ideas off, so please don't hold anything back. And otherwise, I think we might crack into it. So want to make a start on the multi-species winter cropping aspect. Now, obviously with the two techniques that we've focused on here, there is some overlap, so no doubt there'll be a bit of that, but just in terms of these winter crops, one thing we probably didn't cover off so much, and this is particularly for Greg and Claire, was what drives your choice of species and the rates that you use, and has that changed? Have those species and rates changed as you've gained more experience with these techniques?
You want to start, Greg?
Oh, I can do. We just sort of got off the advice from John Oak to get us started there. It hasn't. This year's crops were changed. We're taking radish out. I've got a neighbour now who is growing fine seed crops, and we don't want any cross contamination or anything. So we're just being a little bit more fussy there about what we're putting in. But yeah, trying to just throw lots of good stuff in there is quite important, I think. Yeah. So yeah, and I guess the five groups are the main thing, aren't they? Is what we're looking for.
Yeah, similar to us, we don't have, a perfect mix yet. We're still figuring it out as we go. Last year, our mix was supposed to be brassica dominant, but it ended up being cereal dominant. And we think that was actually some regrowth as well as what the seeds we had put in the ground. So this year aiming to be more brassica dominant. But yeah, again, having the different functional groups in there. And yeah, we'll probably have a play and have a few different blends and different paddocks to see what works best.
Yeah, probably a good point actually. The brassica dominant for winter. Yeah, just to sort of almost guarantees you a bit more yield, I think. Yeah.
Cool. So you're kind of picking the key species, in this case a brassica, that you want to get your yield out of, and then kind of building the rest of your seed mix out from there. Is that the thought process, or?
Yeah, for us, and we worked with a few different seed companies, trying to talk to them a bit about other cropping farmers and making sure, as Greg said, we're not using radish or any other species that are going to impact on neighboring farms. Yeah, and mostly just getting advice from agronomists on the actual rate of seeds. Yeah.
Cool. In terms of the, sorry, Dean.
It's quite two interesting approaches here with what we've seen with the mid-Canterbury mixed croppers compared with Josh, who's only doing kind of 8 or 9 species. And like Greg's saying, what he's seeing is a lot higher yield of edible tucker, as opposed to, some of those species there for other purposes, conditioning the soil, breaking it open, soil biology and the like. What the approach that I've done on my farm is of looking at those areas in a 3-year cycle. When the first year I'll put in heaps of species, to build the soil. And then on this winter, I'm going to try Josh's approach and put more edible species or more higher rates of edible species, knowing that I had done that previous work the previous winter with the likes of the cereals and the rye corns and the sunflowers and the like.
Well, yeah, okay, so it's 3-year rotation. Yeah, those paddocks are all winter. Yeah, it's like a runoff where you were just wintering there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll do, after you've grazed it, what happens then?
Haven't got that far in the strategy yet, Greg, but I'm hoping that I will move and just basically without too much glyphosate be able to move into a pasture dominant mix and then just incorporate it back into the young stocks diet for allocation.
Yeah.
Awesome. And coming to the topic around some of those, the quality of forage when you actually come to grazing it, because I know if you sow some of the species that are quite common in these mixes and sunflowers and cereals, even the slower maturing ones, often they're fully gone to seed, so they're brown and stalky by the time you get to June, July grazing. And there have been a few farmers that have actually shifted back their establishment dates, sometimes to even early January, for example, in order to have high quality forage at winter. And I guess there might be a yield hit there, but has that been relevant for any of you? And I'll bring you in there, Dylan, as well, because you do have some experience with these crops as well.
Yes. So, this last year we had mixed species, and the date I think it was probably about 6 weeks later than we did the year before, and I think it was mid-December. And prior to that, it was I think it was late October. So it was obviously quite different. And what we found in the first year is that the faba beans and a few other species that had gone past the use-by date, and whilst they did a lot of good in the soil, some of them, the foliage that was there to be eaten wasn't there anymore because they basically rotted away. Looked fabulous in the autumn. And you could hardly walk through the crops, but by the time winter came, they'd kind of gone past that. Obviously, the sunflowers do that anyway, because they're there for a different reason. But starting it later, we didn't have quite the same yield, but there was a different season. other factors at play, but we definitely had more of the crop available for for the cows to eat in the previous year. So yeah, it was a good move.
Yeah, last year was our first winter sowing the crop, and we are dry land, so we did it in January, but we had a very, very dry autumn, and that definitely impacted the palatability of it. So we're hoping for better results this year, but we are going to put some in before Christmas, probably in the next week or two, and then we'll do some later in January just to see the difference.
Yeah, we did our first slot mid-February, and the quality of that through June and into July was really good. We still had some in August, and it got pretty rough. But we were losing stock from the runoff as they'd come home. And our last slot went in, the one we looked at last year, that was a bit earlier. That was more mid-December, I think. And by the end, it was getting a bit chewy. So definitely the seeding data is something to consider. We're putting some in shortly. So since from this conversation, I might split it half in December and half in January, just to hedge our bets, I suppose. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we've actually done the same on our block there as well. Some's gone in 2 weeks ago, and some's going to go in after some arable crops in January, February, and I think we'll end up putting the lighter cattle on the higher quality, or the smaller cattle on the higher quality crops, and the bigger ones on anything that's a bit more mature, and cut it that way. Awesome. Cool. Well, the Q&A panel is pretty quiet, but I know there's a few people online that have tend to have a lot of questions, so I'd encourage you to start getting some of them into that Q&A box. Otherwise, you're rolling off my questions the whole time. Probably want to we'll just switch into the bale grazing a little bit while there's wait for those questions to come in. And I've got a few here, and the first one I'd like to go with is, both yourself, Dylan, and Mark, who are the two farmers that I'm aware of that have put the most sort of time and effort into developing bale grazing on your dairy farms. Both of you, South Otago, Southland, similar-ish climates, I suppose. Are there any challenges or advantages of bale grazing in your area versus other parts of the country from your perspective? And I'll throw that to Ross as well, after you, perhaps, Dylan, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would say more challenges than, well, the perception of more challenges, because of course we're very wet, and I guess the rule of the most Southland farmers would say you can't winter on grass in Southland, and Otago would be very similar, I'd say, particularly in some of their clay soils. We're in northern Southland, so we're not quite as wet as some other parts. However, we still can get quite wet, and we winter on a runoff, which has some heavy soil type stuff on the tops of it. So, for example, we've had fodder beet and chow or kale on some of those paddocks, and I know when we had fodder beet, some days I couldn't even drive a tractor through. The ruts were that deep, and I couldn't physically get bales to the cows because it was so wet, and this wet, heavy soil was so heavy. And yet on those same paddocks this year, we bale grazed and hardly made any mud at all. So it was incredible. I wouldn't have believed it if you didn't see it. Obviously managed differently. So that's a perception, I think, but it's not so much. It's about how you do it. So if we were moving cows daily, whether it be square breaks or strip grazing, we would make mud. Would definitely make mud, and giving the same amount of feed, but shifting every day instead of every 3 days, for example, then we would be making mud for sure. And if you see that in a lot of farmers down here were doing baleage, but in rings, and shifted them every day, and they just turned up just like you would see in a typical crop scenario. So while they gained not ploughing the paddocks up initially, that was, you know, from grazing them on was all back to what it would have been with conventional crops. So and the reason I say that is that my belief is, and I'm not sure, Sam, if you've got those videos that I sent you through, but the cows basically, once you give them the amount of area and the amount of bales they in one block, the cows tend to sit and stand on the bales a lot, and because they've got a 3-day break on top of that, they're full and content a lot for a longer period than you would if you feed them daily. So they stand there and they chew their cattle, they sit on the bales, and they're not walking, which what you see a lot on conventional winter crops, or even on, you know, daily shifts and grass. And so if they're not walking physically, they're not doing the damage. And so that's the theory I have at the moment around why we don't make the mud as and under that system. Yeah, so that kind of that's probably the challenge. It's a mindset challenge. It's not actually a challenge for me. It's not. We had some snow drifts that came through, and we made some mud in the corner, and I videoed all that stuff. I've got it on record to show people if they want to see it. But I just went in and just tilled it up in the spring, very briefly, and drilled in some seed, and then we just harvested some silage off the same paddock a month and a half ago. So, you know, whilst the damage we done was probably 2% of the whole area we bale grazed, I had to lightly till her up and drill in some seed, and that to me is you know, negligible, really.
What was your process leading into what paddock selection and process from 12 months ago?
Yeah, sure. On the dairy platform, so we carve our cows on bale grazing. Now that's how we got into it. Actually, we started off just carving them on to see what would happen, and we selected our worst paddocks because I guess we're looking at it as kind of a grassing type of tool. And so over 3 or 4 years of bale grazing the same paddock, you should have had the bale should have been on, you know, fairly much 90 to 100% of the whole paddock. And it's the seed from the bales that go into the ground that's in the litter that's left behind that germinate, and that's where your new grass comes. So it kind of depends on where you get your bales from and what seed you get. So you might you'll have a naturally multi-species paddock by the end of it, or different patches possibly, if you got it from different sources. Yeah. What was the question again?
Leading into, say, for your winter bale grazing,
Yes.
well, we're putting kale in, or multi-species, like the kale paddocks have been ploughed, and we've marked around there, but the multi-species, we've just taken oats off. They'll get a lick around up and then direct drill the multi-species crop in. Yeah. But how are you growing? Do you grow 5 tonne of grass and then pop the bales out, or how's that system working?
Yes, so we're still trying to get our head around this, how that works. But down here, as you're aware, that's quite wet in the spring, so making hay in the spring is not really
yeah.
So we've just taken off 3.5 to 4 tonne of silage and baleage off those paddocks in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'll get a cut of hay hopefully beginning of January, and then we'll get another cut just before we shut them up, basically in March, probably middle of March maybe. It might not be a heavy cut, but it'll be a cut anyway to then let it grow to get some cover. So we have to buy bales in, and at the moment I'm buying about a third of our bales, hay bales in, because we just can't make hay in the spring, so we use that as supplement to milking cows.
Yep. Okay.
As far as the paddock selection at the runoff, it's basically any paddock that's usable to winter on. Some of it's that we've got is a bit steep, so we'll steer clear of some of that and go on the flatter paddocks if we can.
Cool.
Yeah.
And that you comment about the seeds and the species that you're bringing in, Dylan, there raises 2 questions. One is, would you ever consider like basically specifically sourcing your hay, your imported hay from farmers that have those more diverse pastures and stuff like that? So you can, or would you even consider planting some of your runoff and multi-species so that you can then spread that seed around other parts of the farm through bale grazing? And then the second question to that, which Dean raised there, is are you concerned about importing weed species at the same time?
Yeah. I'm not overly concerned with weed species, but it is on my mind. Yeah, depending on, I probably need to be, it's like going checking. You know, if you got stock grazing off, you need to go and check them on a regular basis just to make sure, you know, everyone's happy. So something that maybe if I'm getting bales on, I need to go and look at the pasture that they're harvesting off to see what I'm getting. But I haven't done it yet. I just trust the contractor that I'm dealing with, who I've had a long relationship with. He kind of knows what I'm wanting. Haven't had that yet. So that's the conversations I guess you have with those people that you're buying stuff in. I know Mark said he bought in half a dozen or a dozen bales off a neighbour off a paddock that was just absolute rubbish, and the cows wouldn't even eat the bale. So that you can buy hay that cows don't like. So you do want to make sure that the quality is, you know, of reasonable quality for cows to consume. The funny thing, well, I guess interesting part was we bought some ryegrass straw off a neighbour who does seed, you know, grows ryegrass for seed, and so you'd think that most of the seed's gone out of it, but you want to see it's like here, it's so thick, it's unreal. So there's still plenty of seed in those types of. So don't think that when you're buying straw, there's no seed in it. There's still a lot of seed in it. But of course, that's all one species. So we're not buying as much of that this year. So it's just all ryegrass coming through.
Awesome.
What was the other question? Did that answer that one?
Yeah, I think I think you answered at least 2/3 of it there.
Yeah.
I might bring you in now, Ross, on a similar question to before in terms of I know you're only a season into the trial and observing what's happening at Dylan's place. And I assume you've seen a bit of what Mark's been up to for a little bit longer, but what do you see as the potential, based on your observation so far, for this around the country, whether in terms of the opportunity in different environments or perhaps even the need for it in some areas where wintering systems are currently challenged?
Yeah. What I've seen thus far, and I'm fairly recent to the system, but it looks quite promising. Initially, I was thinking this might be something that's confined to soils that drain reasonably well, and perhaps not some of the sticky, imperfectly, poorly drained soils where cows can perhaps punch through that surface armor that established pastures provide. But I've been quite intrigued by how well it's worked for Dylan and for Mark Anderson in South Otago, who are both wintering or bale wintering on those sticky paddock soils that we know are structurally vulnerable. I would have thought that have made a bit of a mess just because of winter. But we ran a drone over both properties as well as our field experiment to try and quantify how much mud, how much bare ground was there. And the techies are still working on it, but just what I've seen to date, it looks pretty promising. So yeah, I've been quite surprised how well Dylan and Mark are making it work for them. And I was intrigued too by Dylan's comment there around the animal behavior thing. I do think there is something going on there that is causing the animals to be more settled and doing less walking and treading damage, which is probably a big benefit for soil protection. And it's something that our animal welfare colleagues are going to try and measure for the next 2 winters at the experimental site at Dylan's, just to see if we can quantify that, basically reduced walking, reduced treading damage.
So if I paraphrase what you're saying there, if Mark and Dylan can successfully do this on their soils, then most of the rest of the country, obviously where the contour is appropriate, might have a chance getting it working as well?
It's certainly a good proposition. I'm still intrigued how it would work where rainfall is perhaps closer to a metre, southern southland, 1 metre, 1.2 metres of rainfall. So yeah, that's a sort of science question we have to get a head around one way or another, but it's quite intriguing how well they've done on those pellet soils.
Cool. Well, how about we, Dylan, should we bring up the one of those videos that gives a bit of an idea of the animal behaviour? Because I think that's actually something we should have come back to before, just to, because it's come up a few times now. So if you just bear with me for a few seconds, should I bring up the frost video?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yep, either ones.
Right.
Just
Did you hold some footage from me, Dylan?
well, I had my little special folder there.
Okay, so let me get this working. I might just have to do a full screen share. And then pull up.
So these are calving cows on a frosty morning. Just a very short video. That's it.
Yeah. What I see there, Dylan, is from my observation of bale grazing is cows are content for longer.
Yeah.
If you put 12 or 14 kg of kale in front of a cow, in my experience, yes, they'll be content, but this is another level of contentment. And I don't know if it's, I mean, I just said that, if that question comment there that, look, these animals are sleeping in bed, eating in bed.
Yeah.
So it's got to have something to do with the fact that they don't have to go far to get sustenance, surely.
Yeah. I thought you were meaning eating my bed, not eating in my bed. But
No, eating my bed.
yeah. Look, I've got a photo of on a video of us on top of that. When the snow comes through, right up on top. So it's about, I don't know, 50 to 60 meters above where the cows are grazing on crop down below, and now you can see in the distance they're on crop, they're in the mud, waiting to be fed. And there's a cow up top, and it was pretty cold up there. It really, wasn't extreme, but it was certainly very chilling. But they were just standing there, chewing their cud with a big fat gut, happy as anything. And so what I've learned through this is that when they ruminate more on the hay because it's a lot of fiber, and that rumination causes heat. Ross can probably maybe have to allude on this, and that heat then keeps them warm. When it's less fiber in the diet, then they don't ruminate as much, which doesn't have as much heat, which then of course digests faster, and then they want more feed.
That was.
Sorry, where you go?
I was just going to say that was going through my mind too, Dylan, the fibre effect, and I'll have to ask my animal science colleagues if they can shed any insights there, because that might be quite important. Sorry, Chris.
I was going to do you know sort of live weight per hectare with your bale grazing rather than stocking rate, because everyone sort of runs different numbers, but a live weight per hectare maybe?
Haven't worked that out, but it won't be hard. So basically the system that we use is 100 cow mobs on half a hectare per break for 3 days. So if you can equate that out, depends on how heavy your cows are. That's pretty much the system we use, give or take half a day the way we try and get. Yeah, that's kind of what it is. If it's on hilly country, they get a bit more area because you can't bales on all the slopes because it's so steep. But they still, with a bit extra area, they don't make as much mud anyway. So yeah, but if you had 100 cows and you gave them, say, in 2-day breaks, they make a little bit more mud because there's not as many bales for them to stand on. So you got more cows and less bales, or same cows and less bales. So it's just it's pure physics, really. Having more bales means they've got more areas to stand on more comfortably. Yeah.
And they're not trekking backwards and forwards to water troughs. And are you
Yeah, they
are you moving water troughs with the breaks,
Yes,
back fencing?
Yeah, back
Yeah.
fencing, everything. So there's a bit of mud that happens around the trough.
Yeah.
And some that's about leaking troughs and on slopes, or those things. So we can probably improve on that. But I just went through again with those patches and just drilled them with the drill in late September, and you'd hardly know now. Yeah.
Cool.
I just remembered, Dean, we've actually realised we've got a bit of a detailed case study on what Mark's up to with his bale grazing system too, that we produced a few months ago, that we haven't actually linked onto the case study page yet, so we'll do that this afternoon for anyone that hasn't seen that, because there's some good detail in there too, in terms of some of those implementation questions. For Claire Ross and Claire, Greg and Dean, the three of you are in quite different contexts, mostly pretty free draining soils like that Ross was talking about before, and you all said earlier that you're considering giving bale grazing a crack. Have you identified any sort of different challenges or considerations, or do you have any questions that you're still working through at the moment in terms of how you implement this?
I guess just getting a good source of, hey, it's good. You want round bales, don't you? That's the go with bale grazing?
Yeah, it is, because you can sit them in the paddock for long periods of time and the water runs off them. If it was squares, they'd just they'd rot, and so they'd be litter, but they wouldn't be
food.
Yeah. And so there's a question there I see come through, how many bales, etc. So it's about 30 bales to the hectare, probably 28 to 30 thereabouts, and they're just spaced out evenly like a grid, and on the whole blocks, I put a bale on as steep as I could go without, you could tip it over with your hand, but not, it would stay there. And when we come to feed it, would just tip it over on its flat and take the netting off, and then so otherwise they end up pushing it down the hill, and then you lost the bale. So it's kind of just being practical with that. But there's some slopes you just can't do that. So we haven't done it, but I know Hamish Belsky talks about rolling it, letting it roll out down the hill. If you've got a run out, that would be good, and they'd eat it, and it'd still be litter and stuff like that. So that would work, I think. Yeah.
One of the important questions we want to address in years 2 and 3 is how effective the hay is as a sponge for soaking up urinary nitrogen, because one of the big environmental challenges with wintering is the nitrogen leakage, where you graze out the crop, you've got bare soil, winter drainage. We've got a hypothesis that hay, because of the C to N ratio of it, it's reasonably mature grass mixed in there, that might be a good sponge for holding on to the urinary nitrogen that the animals are urinating onto while they're loafing there. That might be quite an important thing if nitrogen leaching is one of the farm challenges. But yeah, at this stage, it's just a hypothesis that we think we need to do some research to address.
And while you're on that, Ross, some of us are pretty data driven, and kind of looking for a bit more data on how these techniques perform before committing potentially. So what other things apart from nitrogen leaching have you been monitoring at Dylan's place, and what you mentioned you were planning to add some new monitoring protocols in years 2 and 3?
Yes, the first winter just gone, we spent quite a lot of effort chasing drainage. So the nitrate leaching figures are key for the funders. But the second thing we made a point of was making sure we're doing the measures of basically mud. We've got a suite of measures we use as proxies of attributes that drive soil erosion risk. We've got a pretty good soil erosion model now that's driven by basically how much mud you produce. So that will be key information. In years 2 and 3, our animal welfare colleague is going to get involved and look at basically how settled the animals are, how much they're moving, how clean they are. And then finally, my greenhouse gas research colleagues at Invermay are going to drill into some of the greenhouse gas footprints of the bale grazing versus the crop treatment approach. And they'll focus mainly on measuring nitrous oxide and using the inventory calculations for the other, or mainly methane footprints.
Brilliant. So we're going to have a heap of info coming through there. And I think we talked about the other day. So Dylan's hosting a field day on the 10th of March down in Southland. And we've got a placeholder event on our events page and on the case study page, I think, as well, where you can register for that just to keep updated. But we're hoping that we're going to have a bunch of that first year data available for that field day, Ross.
Yes, we'll have as much as we can prepared and summarised. The nitrogen leaching story, there's nitrogen from last winter that's still in the post and on its way to the collectors, so it'll be preliminary estimates, but we're sort of seeing a bit of a separation, well, quite a clear separation in the treatments. So our hypothesis seems to be holding true at this early stage of events.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Now, I think we might, we've got a question from Ross back on the multi-species, so we might swing back that way for a bit, and then we can finish off with whatever's top of mind. We'll just remind those listening in to fire your questions in. We've got about 20 minutes left, so don't finish wishing you'd asked something that you didn't get around to. But good question from Ross. With multi-species winter crops, are people able to winter cows and keep a sward to carry through spring and summer, or are most people re-drilling in spring? If so, what species are surviving and thriving in the spring and summer?
Well, none of ours have survived at this stage. Last year we were a bit lean on feed, so everything got eaten. So unfortunately, nothing survived. I had some dry land here at home and I drilled it, it didn't germinate, but then the big rain in May, I had a hell of a strike. Like if there's seed there, it should germinate if you give it a chance. Hope that helps.
Yeah, we had the same experience. Just had to graze it quite hard this winter, and we were hoping for regrowth, but didn't see any. So may try to change that species a bit this year to get better results, but yeah, no success so far.
So,
I had quite the opposite result. We had everything recover that we wintered on. In fact, we've harvested more off those wintering areas during spring than we did during winter. That is an estimate and a guess, but we got 2 to 3 grazings off all of our winter area before we blew it out. It was real sad to blow it out because the diversity that came back was incredible. The Phacelia and vetch regrowth and mainly pasture sward was the main species that recovered. But that's our second year of seeing those recoveries. In fact, our first multi-species winter paddock has had no glyphosate, and we've just over-drilled twice into it. So the inputs that that area has had has been significantly reduced, no fert and no sprays for 24 months now.
Cool.
Is that a soil type? Dean, you've been to Claire Ingreg's place. Is this? Are we talking soil type there? Rainfall? Like what are you? Why have you got good regrowth after your winter crops compared to Claire and Greg?
I'd suggest probably lower stocking rate, and that's all on dry land. So my challenge this winter will be to see the same recovery on irrigated multi-species, which I reckon will be more challenging, as Greg and Claire can attest to.
Yeah, right.
But there's another question there from Ross, another Ross, about pretty similar about success with an annual winter crop setting seed and regrowing in the spring. And Ross, yeah, the species that came back, ryegrass, but yeah, the Phacelia and vetch, really impressive how well that recovered as well.
Yeah, a lot of our seeds got eaten by birds.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I've certainly seen mixed results over the last few years around that. Some, like you're talking Claire and Greg, where the wet winter and stuff like that means that you know, it doesn't really matter whether you're pure kale or whether you've got 50% cereals in there. Certainly, just the nature of winter and dairy cows means that it all basically gets trampled and doesn't come away. And likewise, I've seen in dry winters and dairy systems where it's almost been 100% ground cover post grazing, and it grows back beautifully. And by the end of August, you know, I've seen farmers milking off it. So seems a little bit of a I guess there's context and season there as well. But I guess the point to take away there is I guess you can design in for these mixes to grow back and have a bit of spring feed there, but you can't guarantee it. We're giving a crack this year with triticale and an annual ryegrass to try and achieve that, because we've got an early spring pinch with ewes and lambs that would love to have that feed for, but like I say, we'll just have to see how the season goes.
It's all about protecting that residual there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep. What else have I got on the multi-species? I guess in terms of despite your experiences there, Claire and Greg, and not having that growth, is it still something? Is that early spring regrowth without having to put a drill through? Is that still something you're chasing as a goal?
Yeah.
Like
We would like it to happen definitely on a wintering block. Yeah, because we keep a young stock up there, so it'd be great if we could keep grazing the paddocks.
It's probably hasn't been a priority for us, but yeah, why not? If we could make it work, we would take it. Yeah, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, I guess the second part of that question comes back to what we're talking about before. When you compare the mix that Josh Bradfield's got up there on the case study page, which is very sort of forage quality heavy, not much in the way of grasses in there, versus something like the one that you had, Claire, or other ones we're talking about where we have got a higher proportion of grasses and cereals in there, partly for you know, they're partly doing the fibre in the diet, partly soil cover, partly regrowth post grazing. But often there's there's been other farmers talk about, and actually some people have even put quite a few perennial grasses in there as well, and noticed, I guess, yield penalties potentially by pushing that balance too far down that line. So I guess the last question on that one for me is, how do you find that balance?
Yeah, it was a summer multi-species, was half annuals, half perennials. Once annuals went, there was just too many gaps, so those gaps got filled up with thistles and that sort of rubbish. So that's it's almost all of one or none in a way. Yeah, I know that's a tough one.
Yeah, we're still learning and playing around. Yeah, don't have a clear answer.
I've got one on the platform, just went in the other day, and it's sort of perennial heavy, but there's others in there that will just try and let it grow out and get a light silage crop off it, rather than that 10-11 ton, maybe 4 or 5 ton, and then hopefully the perennials will burst out, and hopefully they'll tiller out. I'm a bit worried that they may not if we let it go too far. So they're more experimenting.
Thanks. And while you're there, Greg, Rebecca's asked that you mentioned at the start the importance of variation in height of the species within the crop. Why is that?
Well, if you've got all tall stuff, there's nothing underneath. And I think those gaps could be filled with like fibrous oats and that sort of thing. They can chew on as well. There's all gaps there, and ground cover as well. I think, yeah. But I just see it looks good when you've got vetch climbing up through like your brassicas and that sort of thing. And filling the gaps, you've got so much space there, you can fill it up with variety.
Yeah. Is that you're trying to utilize light, you're trying to increase yield, you're trying to provide ground cover?
Weed suppression as well. A bit of weed spray, because you can't spray anything once you've got these crops in, you're committed. That's it. What you get's what you get. So if we can just have your desirable species growing, you should be okay. That's, yeah.
And that actually segues nicely to another topic we should touch on, which is insect pressure in these crops. And what's your experience been there? Not being able to spray.
Positive. We've had to aphid spray kale, but the multi-species just does its business. You see ladybugs getting around, bees, all sorts. Yeah.
Yeah,
Better
same.
experience.
And there were insects in the paddock, but they weren't, causing damage to the crops. They're just eating each other.
Yeah. Well, what little bit of damage there was insignificant. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
You see the odd like bulb have a bit of bit of chewing on the side and that sort of thing, but leaves weren't getting decimated, and you weren't folding kale leaves over and seeing them absolutely covered in aphids, and so it was just a lot cleaner.
I don't know if you remember, Sam, but the last paddock of monoculture kale we grew, we drilled Phacelia around the outsides and a strip down the middle, and we didn't spray that paddock for butterfly because we weren't spraying our multi-species anyway, and there was very little butterfly damage to that crop, and I don't know how the Phacelia did that. I assume that it brought in some beneficials that ate the caterpillar, maybe, I'm not sure, but yeah, we didn't have to use any selective insecticide on that crop. So it's something else you can look at doing, and I've seen other farmers do it, is plant some flowers around the outside of your crop paddock.
Yeah, true that. So even if someone, let's say you've already drilled your winter crop this year, but you're kind of curious about this conversation, and that would that be a place to start, is tickle in some Phacelia and vetch and a few other flowering species, and don't spray. Don't spray the last couple of strips next to those, and see what happens, and build some confidence. Is that a step into this kind of field?
Yeah, why not?
There's one thing for sure from my experience is you won't get less yield, probably.
Yeah. We had some seed arrive on it. Must have been a bit of a muck up back at the depot. It was way before I'd even thought about multi-species crop, and it was Persian clover. I'd taken a cut of oats off, but there was Persian clover, turnips, and rape all growing together. And it was bloody fantastic going in there. It smelled nice. The cows loved it. There was a little bit of trampling. I thought, I was wastage there, but that paddock's been going really well since then. And it was just, it was full. Everything was full from the ground up to the leaf. There wasn't big gaps in between. So, and that Persian clover smells beautiful. It's really nice.
Yeah, wicked. Going to come back to a question on bale grazing from Michael. One of the many benefits of bale grazing is building or rebuilding or repairing soil structure. How's that going, and how are you choosing paddocks? Back to you, Dylan, I think.
I guess that's it's another reason to select, we select our poorest paddocks because they've obviously got some issues within the soil. That's why the pasture is not growing ultimately. And so those paddocks we have chosen have reasonably well compacted. And I guess Michael's being a big part of this. So it's good intro to you, Michael. There, I've just got the report in front of me. Actually, it reminded me the pictures of what we went through in the same paddock that we've got the trial plots in. It's probably our worst. It definitely is our worst paddock on the farm. And we in our first year of bale grazing, we did some visual soil assessments and within the bale grazing litter and then out where the bale wasn't, and saw the differences, etc. And where the bale was, or the litter was in the early, mid-spring. It was very waterlogged, and there's no air in the soil. I was hoping to see a lot more improvement, but actually going backwards, it seemed. And then we came back in March in the same season, completely transformed. So where we did some infiltration tests with, so putting basically a pipe in the ground, pouring 2 inches of water, and initially, I think the water didn't actually drain away, but within an hour we had to just pull the pipe out and walk away because the water was still sitting in there. It had drained away somewhat, but not much at all. In March, came back, did the same thing, and 1 inch drained away in 10 seconds, the second inch drained away in 13 seconds in the same spot. So, and when you dug the soil up, you wouldn't recognize it. So the whole structure changed. There was really good mottling. The root depth was way deeper. There was a lot more worm life. All the things that you expect to see in soil, a good healthy soil, you're seeing right there. And when you fold the soil, when you dig it out, you fold it back to see where the cracks come in. It was just falling away, and it was more horizontal cracks rather than more vertical cracks than your horizontal ones, meaning that the water was getting in, which is what we're seeing visually with the water infiltrating as well. So that was like, wow, this is incredible. We've just done that again back in this spring in the same paddock, and whether it's because it was wet or not, it got fallen back a little bit, but we envisaged that and coming back in March again this coming year. The time of year it's going to be quite different again. So, but digging up, look, I'm just looking at the picture here that we took. The root depth in those original bale litters patches was, and the soil itself was way better structure than where the bale hadn't been. And that was 12 months on. So yeah, the proof is there that the bale grazing definitely does improve your soil health.
I think, Sam, something I asked Mark during his interview that never made the cut was, how applicable, we did start talking about this at the start of this convo, how applicable was bale grazing to, for example, lightly drained mid-Canterbury irrigated soils like what I'm dealing with. And I'd be interested to know if Ross concurs on this, but from Mark's experience, he sees the benefits, first and foremost, as building organic matter. Secondly, is water infiltration, and obviously that's leading to hopefully less irrigation. So those are the benefits that I'm kind of punting on if I do give it a try, that I'd be looking for. And so going back to that question about which paddocks, some of our farm was ex-pine forestry, so that might be the place where I try, because I know that the soil's really shallow there, and that's going to help to build that a little bit. Ross, do you think, from that water infiltration, is that going to be more of a benefit than the building of the soil, the organic matter, do you think?
Yes, but I think there's probably quite a number of beneficial things going on there in terms of maintaining or improving soil quality. Just as an aside, I'm down here in Southland digging holes, doing quite a lot of visual soil assessments, and you can see the punishment that paddocks that are 1-2 years out of crop are showing. And that combination of cultivation, treading, do it all again for a second year most probably those soils are pretty punished. So if we can minimize that treading damage, as Dylan and Mark seem to be doing, that can only be good. We won't be burning off the good soil organic matter that pasture roots are putting down. But I'd be pretty keen to see you guys in Canterbury giving the bale grazing a go, because to be honest, I was quite curious about the in leaching benefit, and you guys are quite challenged with groundwater issues. I think there's a good hypothesis there just on the nitrogen leaching reduction alone that it'd be great to get some quantitative data on.
I've got a trial site for you, Ross, if you want to replicate up here.
The only challenge, and you'll notice I'm not volunteering to do the digging, but getting a method that can work on your stony soils is quite daunting. So I'll have to ask my colleagues at Lincoln about the best way forward on that, because I'm sure we can do something.
Cool. I'm finding this, it's a kind of a counterintuitive conversation we're having here about restoring your worst paddocks by wintering on them, which I'm kind of just having an internal chuckle at, but I love it. I love the concept. Now we've just gone 1 o'clock, so we'll just try and wrap up. I've got a final question, and actually Rebecca's got a nice one that dovetails in quite nicely with it. And so Rebecca's question is, as you all learn more about winter grazing, what will you do or try in winter 2022 that you haven't done previously? And I'm going to back that up with a secondary question to answer afterwards, which is, if you're talking to a farmer who has a low appetite for risk, but is keen to give something a crack, what's your advice? So what are you doing next year that's different? And what's your advice for someone who's keen just to try something? Anyone want to take a crack? Dylan, I might throw you up first, and then we'll go Dylan, Claire, Greg, Dean. How about that?
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess the pattern for us has been, we're going to our third winter coming into this season. First year we did 2 paddocks and we calved on them. Second year we done half the herd on bale grazing. This year we're going whole herd. So I guess that's the change in what we're doing. We're going away from crops. We've put 1 crop in, and that's just to put our young stock on. And I'm hoping just to put a focus on the bale grazing just with the whole herd, and after that I'm hoping that we can start bale grazing the young stock as well. One of the differences within the bale grazing though would be that we're going to try and look at making sure our hay quality is still maintained to be good, but more about our grass. We had a dry, like everyone did, had a dry autumn, which meant that a lot of our grass stored during that autumn period for our winter was really dry and poor quality. So and we we didn't do a last cut before we shut up, so we're going to try that to have more leafy stuff going into the winter. And whilst that didn't have a detrimental effect on where we wanted the cows going to calving, we believe we can get it better. So yeah, that's probably, and so my advice, give a little bit of farm, like Dean was mentioning. If you can not sacrifice, but put aside 1 paddock or half a paddock, or just try 2 hectares or 1 hectare with 15-30 bales, and just see what happens. And that's exactly what we did, really, and that's how we've got to where we are. Yeah, and what haven't got much to lose.
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. Claire.
So we're going to try again with the diverse crops with a few different blends in it. This winter we will try to keep 2 herds separate. So we'll have 1 herd on conventional kale and 1 herd on the diverse crop. So hopefully we can get a bit more information from the animal health side of things as well. And we are planning to try the bale grazing as well on a few paddocks. So that should be good. And yeah, in terms of advice, it would be similar, just to start small. As I said, we put in kale in the ground as a safety net for us, make sure that we still have, whatever happens, we still have feed for the cows. So yeah, try to not just go guns blazing.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. Greg.
We didn't quite get the yield we wanted last year from either the kale or the mixed crop. The mixed crop was probably more just management. A block nozzle on the pivot over a big area reduces your yield there in dryland country. So just probably been getting the little things right there. So if we can grow more crop, we can feed less supplement, so less tractors running around. Cows or the young stock will be a hell of a lot more settled, so less movement. That's what we're going to target. And advice for somebody: if you make a mistake, don't beat yourself up. You know, I've made truckloads, and it's just part of the deal. But yeah, don't beat yourself up over it, and look at it. Okay, well, we just got to change it a little bit, and it might work better next time. So have a go, but yeah, give yourself a break at the same time.
Oh, thanks, Greg. Dino.
Yeah, just as I mentioned before, we're going to try and simulate our multi-species recovery under irrigation. So hopefully we can get similar sort of recovery. I'm not even sure why I think that it won't recover as well under irrigation, but just from Greg's and Claire's experience this past winter with very difficult and challenging conditions, I think that it will, just by nature of the soil and land being softer, that it will be more difficult to see the same recovery. So fingers crossed. And as far as advice, if you haven't tried any multi-species, it might even be a good idea to try in your pasture sward first. Get brave with adding some chicory and some plantains and some different types of grasses in a grass paddock, and you'll see very quickly that there's nothing to be afraid of, and maybe that way you'll feel more brave to give it a shot in your extremely valuable wintering area, because obviously that, you know, that's the risk, is that, you know, your wintering area is under so much pressure to yield, to feed your cows, that it might be a little bit daunting. So yeah, try your pasture sward.
Beauty. Thanks, Dane. And Ross, have you got any final points or thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I'm just really interested in what's going on and keeping an eye on all these responses that individually they're quite significant, it seemed to me, and collectively are quite important, I think. I was going to comment, it doesn't come up, but one of the benefits we are really interested in is the catch crop effect of Dylan's winter pasture. I'd be quite amazed at how quickly that pasture has come back into the round, and to me that's acting as a really efficient catch crop.
You know, and there's some good data around the benefits of catch crops, of like an oats catch crop or something like that, usually in terms of the nitrogen that they do take up and keep out of the waterways, isn't there, Ross? So you'd assume the pastures are doing as good, if not better, job with the big root systems that they've got established in there.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant. Dylan, have you got one more thing you're itching to say there, or is that
I was just going to add to the just to say that those paddocks that we carved on, they'll be, so we eat them off in August, and they're back in the round by middle of October. So they come in the second round, halfway through the second round. So that's how fast they come in.
Wow,
That's good recovery.
I think we were we were just sowing oats into our winter crops in mid-October, so let alone milking off them.
Already.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, well, thanks very much to all five of you for your time. Really appreciate it. And same to those who are on the webinar and for firing those questions through. I love these conversations, and it's amazing how much we can get out of, you know, a group of people like yourselves in such a short amount of time. So I hope others watching this now and watching the recording feel the same. Just a couple of reminders from me. Again, the field day that Dylan's hosting on the 10th of March down in Southland. Jump on the Quorum Sense website through the events page there, and you can register for that. There's no details at the moment, but we'll once it's updated, we'll fire out an email on to everyone that's registered and make sure that you know. Really looking forward to that. I'll be there, and we'll get all the data that Ross is collecting as it becomes available. We'll keep that case study page up to date. There's also a huge amount of information coming through on the Align Farms website, courtesy of Claire. They did a big release about a week or two ago, and they've got a few farm works ongoing at the moment. So we'll make sure that we add that link to our page as well, so it's easy to find. But if you just Google Align Farms, you'll find that. Some great work that Claire's been doing there. She's also helping us out at Quorum Sense as well, which is great. And finally, yeah, I'm just the point of these case studies is really to support farmers going from where they are to where they want to be, and part of that is a whole, there's a heap of detail and information involved in these practices that we're talking about, and ultimately system changes, and we're keen just to kind of collect as much as we can and make that accessible to help people take that next step. So if anyone's got questions, has gone through that case study material and have got questions, if you've got that question, then chances are is that there's a 30, 50 other farmers with the same one. So if you can flick that to us, we can do what we can to try and pull some information together and make that accessible, so that this case study page becomes a resource that can really get people quite a long way along that decision making path, and hopefully not necessarily guaranteeing success initially, but certainly learning something. So thanks again for your time. This has been recorded, so we'll get that up online as well. And if you've got people that that you think would be really keen to watch it, make sure that you share this with them. Otherwise, thanks very much, and hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Really
Thanks,
good.
everyone.
Awesome.
See ya.